Hello and welcome back to another full step-by-step PC build guide, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build a PC in Lian Li's brand new Lancool 216. So take a look at the other parts I'm going to be building with today. For the motherboard I'm going to be using ASRock's flagship X670E Taichi Carrara. For the CPU I'm going to be using AMD's new 12-core Ryzen 9, the 7900X. Keeping our CPU cool, I've got a 360mm AIO from DeepCool, it's the LS720. For RAM, I've got 32GB of Kingston Fury Beast RGB DDR5 at 5600 megatransfers per second. For storage, I'm going with a single Gen 4 NVMe M.2 drive from TEAMGROUP. It's their T-Force CARDEA A440 Pro in 1TB capacity. Powering the whole build, I've got an 850 watt fully modular gold power supply from Cooler Master. It's the V850 Gold Eye Multi. For the graphics card, I'm going to be using the ASUS ROG STRIX RTX 3080. For case fans, I'm going to be using the new improved second version of Lian Li's SL120 Uni fans. I'm also going to be showing you how to install the case's optional ARGB controller and USB module. And the final part for today's build is some white cable extensions from CableMod. Okay, let's get building. I'm going to make a start by preparing the case. This case has loads of really cool features, so as we go I'll point these out. To remove our tempered glass side panel, we've got a captive thumb screw on the back which we need to loosen. Once it's loosened, the panel can be tilted out and then lifted away. Our other side panel can be tilted out and lifted away. Taking a look at our case's front I/O, we've got a power and reset button, we've got a combined headphone and microphone jack, we've got two USB Type A ports and a single Type C port. There is an option to move the front I/O module to the side of the case, and I'll show you that later on in this guide. To remove the case's top panel, we've got two captive thumb screws at the back which we need to loosen, and then the panel can simply be pulled backwards and lifted away. Taking a closer look at the panel we've just removed, you'll notice Lian Li are going with just mesh at the top, although the holes in the mesh are quite fine, and as most people will be having exhaust at the top, a dust filter isn't required. So at the top of the case you can fit three 120 or two 140mm fans. So if you do decide to go with two 140mm fans at the top, because we've got a mesh panel at the top and we've got a gap here, one problem you can have is that air can actually leak out, resulting in turbulent flow in the case. So Lian Li have this little seal plate that comes in the case accessory box. So what you'll do is you'll simply slide it into place here at the front and then secure it with 4 screws. So this not only looks cleaner, but should hopefully improve the airflow in the case. Another really cool feature at the top of the case is we're actually going to be able to route the cables coming from our top fans directly through to the rear compartment of the case, so you're not going to see them at all at the front. So we've got a hole here, we can bring the cable through, and then we can pass it directly into the case's rear compartment. And if we put our top fan up, you'll notice that actually in the main body of the case, you're not actually going to see any of the cables at all. So this is definitely going to make the cable management much easier. To improve access during the build, the top of the case is removable. It's held on with 2 screws at the front. With the screws removed, to remove the top panel, all we need to do is tilt it up the way and it can simply be lifted away. For most builds in this case, you're not going to need to remove the case's front panel, although if you do want to change out the front fans or move the top I/O to the side, you are going to need to remove the panel, so I'll show you how to do it. It simply just pulls off from the bottom. Taking a closer look at the panel that we've just removed, you'll notice that Lian Li are going with just mesh on the front. They do, however, offer a dust filter that will fit into here, and that needs to be purchased as an optional extra. With the front panel removed, you can see the two 160mm ARGB fans that are pre-installed at the front of the case, and you're going to have ARGB both on the rim of the fan and on the fan blades themselves. If you do prefer, you can install a radiator at the front and you can fit up to a 360 or 280mm radiator. And as well, you can fit 3 120 or 2 140mm fans at the front if you prefer. The front fans are installed on a removable bracket. It's held on with 6 thumb screws. Just before I show you how to remove it, I want to point out that I have freed up the fan cables. They were plugged into the ARGB controller at the back of the case. With the thumb screws removed, the fans can simply be pulled forward and the cables pulled through the cutout. So you can see our 160mm fans are mounted to 2 brackets on either side, and obviously you want to install 140 or 120, the brackets are going to be narrower together, but you're going to be able to install them onto the bracket outside the case and then simply slot them in and secure them with the 6 thumb screws. At the rear of the case we've got a single 140mm fan, and like the fans at the front, it is a PWM fan with 4-pin connectors, although unfortunately this one doesn't have any ARGB on it. So I'm going to be changing it out for a fan that does have ARGB, so we'll get it removed at this stage. It's held on at the back with 4 screws. Down at the bottom of the case, we've got this mesh panel. Unlike some of the other Lancool cases, this isn't a door, it's actually fixed in place. Although it is removable, there's one screw at the back which we need to remove. And then with the screw removed, we should simply be able to slide the panel backwards and then lift it away. I can't think of any reason why you'd need to remove the mesh panel to build in the case, but I've showed you how to do it for completeness, so I'm just going to put it back into place. At the bottom of the case, we've got a tray-style dust filter over the power supply's intake fan, and it can simply be pulled out from the back. In terms of motherboard support, the case will support motherboards up to ATX of a maximum width of 280mm. In its current configuration, you can install up to ATX size motherboards, but to fit an eATX motherboard like we have, we're going to need to reverse this cable bracket. The bracket is held on with 3 screws. With the screws removed, we're able to slide the bracket out and flip it round. Now importantly, we are going to want to keep this larger rubber grommet to the top. So in terms of flipping it out, we want to flip it out this way and rotate it round. We've got 3 little notches here to slide this into. And then we can put the bracket into place, and then we're going to secure it onto this side with the 3 screws. So in terms of installing your motherboard in the case, it can be installed in 2 different positions. And if you take a look at the standoffs at the back of the case, you'll notice that each standoff can be installed in 2 different positions at either the down or up arrow. So with the case in its default position, with the standoffs installed at the lower arrow, the case is in water-cooled mode. And it is optimised to allow you to install up to a 360 or 280mm radiator at the top, and that's the reason the motherboard is in the lower position, to give you space for the fans and radiator. And you've got up to 63mm of space at the top, and Lian Li say the maximum thickness for a set of fans and radiators at the top of the case is 60mm. So if you move all the standoffs to the upper arrow position, obviously this is going to shift the motherboard higher up in the case. You're no longer going to be able to fit a radiator at the top of the case, and you're limited to fans, and this is where you can fit 3 120 or 2 140mm fans at the top. The advantage of air-cooled mode is because the motherboard's installed slightly higher up, you have more room at the bottom for larger fans, and in air-cooled mode you can fit 2 140mm fans at the bottom, while in water-cooled mode you're limited to 2 120mm fans. It is also possible to mount a 240mm radiator at the bottom of the case. The Lancool 216 can accommodate pretty large CPU air coolers up to a maximum height of 180.5mm. So the first step to convert the case to air-cooled mode is to move the standoffs to the upper position, and in the case accessory box you get this standoff removal and insertion tool. It simply pops onto the end of your screwdriver, and then you're able to put it over the standoff, grab hold of the standoff, move it to the upper position and tighten it back into place. So now we've got all our standoffs moved to the upper position, you might be wondering how it's going to work with the motherboard's I/O shield. Well, this is reversible. As it comes, it's set for water-cooled mode. Now that we've moved the standoffs up to the air-cooled position, we're going to have to invert the I/O shielded bracket. So it's held on with 4 screws, 2 at the front and 2 at the rear. So we simply need to insert the screwdriver through the cutout at the front of the case, and with the fan installed, you can actually fit it either side off the fan, but I've removed it to give you a better look. And then at the rear of the case, we've got 2 more holes here to put the screwdriver into. So with the 4 screws removed, the bracket is now free. Before I turn it round, I want to point out this little panel at the top. We're going to turn it upside down, and then the panel is going to be at the bottom, and that's how this works. So whenever I try to move the panel into the case, it's catching, and it's catching on this middle rear standoff, so I'm just going to remove it. So with it removed, I'm able to pull the bracket into the case, turn it upside down, and then slide it back into place. And then we're going to secure it into place again with the same 4 screws. Okay, so that's the case in air-cooled mode. The standoffs are all moved to the upper position, and the I/O shield bracket has been reversed. In the case accessory box, you get this fan bracket, which allows you to install a 120mm fan behind your graphics card for improved airflow. So the first step is to secure the fan bracket to a 120mm fan using standard fan screws, which are included. Next, we can set our fan bracket into place at the back, and then we're going to secure it into place using 4 thumb screws. And then we've got a cutout at the bottom to feed the fan cable through. So you can see with the graphics card installed in the top 2 slots on the case, we have no trouble getting a HDMI cable into place. However, if you install the graphics card in the second and third slots, you're not actually able to plug a HDMI cable directly into it. I did try installing the HDMI cable first into the graphics card and then installing the graphics card, but I couldn't get the graphics card to fit. With 3 of the screws removed from the fan, I am able to get the HDMI cable plugged in, but then I can't get the bracket back up to where it goes because it's putting pressure on the HDMI cable. So unless you've got some special HDMI cable, you're not going to be able to install the rear fan bracket with the graphics card installed in the second and third slot on the case. So what this really means is with the motherboard in air-cooled mode, you're going to be using slots 1 and 2. So in air-cooled mode, you're going to be able to install the rear fan bracket. With it in water-cooled mode, it's slot 2 and 3. So in water-cooled mode, unless you've got a special HDMI cable that you're able to fit, this really thin, flexible one that I have doesn't fit. You're not going to be able to use the rear fan bracket. The other option that you have is to rotate the PCIe bracket and install your graphics card vertically. So the bracket is held on with 4 screws. So with the 4 screws loosened, we can slide the bracket backwards into the case, rotate it round, and then slide it back into place. And then we're going to secure it into place with the same 4 screws. So you can see now our PCIe brackets have been inverted. Next thing to do is install the standoffs for our riser cable. And we've got 3 different positions we can install them in. Lian Li recommend installing this one at the back so you can use the rear fan bracket in air-cooled mode. So all we need to do is screw the standoffs into place. We can then set our PCIe riser cable into place and screw it into the standoffs. It is important to note the riser cable doesn't come with the case and it has to be picked up as an optional extra. I'll put a link to it in the description. If you do want to use a different Ryzen cable, it's important to note that the distance between the standoffs is 112.7 millimeters, so make sure yours is compatible. So that's what the graphics card looks like installed in the vertical orientation. If I add the rear fan bracket in, we don't have any problem plugging in our HDMI cable to the graphics card. The other important thing to point out is the orientation of this bracket has also turned around 90 degrees and these slots are now running vertically, and also where you fix it has changed. We're fixing it here and here and here and here with the same 4 thumb screws. So it does look to be exactly the same story here in the vertical orientation with this rear fan bracket. We're only going to be able to install it with the graphics card installed all the way towards the motherboard in the first slot. If we moved it across a slot, we wouldn't be able to fit the cable in and the rear fan bracket. So one thing I was keen to test was installing the graphics card in this slot closest to the motherboard with the motherboard installed in the water-cooled mode, i.e. towards the bottom of the case, because Lian Li didn't mention that this particular mode was compatible with the rear fan bracket. And I've used pretty bulky hardware, so we've got an EATX motherboard, an RTX 3080, and everything seems to fit with the rear fan bracket on. A few observations: you'll notice the graphics card is quite close to the motherboard, so hopefully that will be good for the temperatures, although I imagine if you did move it closer to the middle of the case where it's away from everything, it might have slightly better airflow, but that would be something to test out. And the other thing to note, because our riser cable is installed to both of these brackets at the bottom, you're not actually going to be able to install any fans underneath the graphics card in the vertical orientation. So you can see here with the graphics card in the vertical orientation installed in the slot closest to the motherboard, we have no problem getting plugged into the I/O on this row of the graphics card. I do have a HDMI port here, and there's absolutely no way I'm going to be able to plug that in while using the same rear bracket. And likewise, if we move this over one slot, there'll be no way I'll be able to plug any of the cables in to the back of the graphics card with this rear fan installed. If you're not planning on installing fans at the bottom of the case, it is possible to install 2.5-inch SSDs. So you can have one here and one here. However, if you go with your graphics card in the vertical orientation, you're only able to have one over this side. So as we're going for fans at the bottom, we're going to need to remove these brackets. They're each held on with 2 screws. And then with the screws removed, we can tilt the bracket up and lift them away. So you might be wondering how we secure fans at the bottom. Well, the fans actually sit on top, and then Lian Li include these long screws which go down through the fans, securing them to the bottom of the case. So I did mention you can fit a 240mm radiator at the bottom, and you might be wondering how you're going to secure it. Obviously with the fans and the radiator, you're not going to be able to screw the long screws down through it, and you're not going to really be able to screw them up from underneath. Well, what you want to do is take these brackets, you're going to fit these to the bottom of your radiator and screw them in from underneath, and Lian Li includes screws for doing that. And then you're going to take your radiator fans on the brackets, slot them into place in one piece, slide them down, and then secure it with the screws at the front again. Moving into the rear compartment, it looks like cable management should be really straightforward. We've got these Velcro cable straps, and then we've got lots of clips as well for securing the cables. It's good to see that we've got rubber grommets on the two main cutouts over to the right hand side of the motherboard. At the top of the case we've got our RGB and fan controller, and we've got 6 PWM connectors and 4 3-pin 5V ARGB connectors. And the pre-installed fans I've removed, but they come installed up to the connectors already, so you're not going to have to worry about the fans that are already installed in the case. Connecting up the ARGB fan hub is really straightforward. We've got 3 cables. We've got a SATA cable we need to plug into a SATA cable coming from our power supply to power the hub. We've got a 4-pin PWM connector we need to plug into a system fan header. And then we've got a 3-pin 5V ARGB connector we need to plug into an ARGB header on our motherboard, and that's then going to allow our motherboard to control both the lighting and the fan speed of everything that's plugged into the hub. Just beneath the fan hub we've got a controller tray where we can mount our ARGB controllers, for example the controller for our Lian Li Unifans. Beneath that we've got 2 dedicated 2.5-inch drive brackets. They're each held on with a thumb screw. Once we've removed the thumb screw, the bracket can simply be lifted up and away. You're then going to take your 2.5-inch drive, fix it to the back of the bracket, and then screw it in from the other side before returning it to the bracket. Our power supply is going to go down at the bottom of the case, and the case is compatible with full-sized ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 220mm. There's no removable power supply bracket at the back, so we are going to have to slide our power supply in from the side before screwing it in from the back. At the bottom of the case we've got a hard drive cage, and this is movable and removable. To move it we need to push this little lever up. We can slide it towards the back, and that frees the hard drive cage up. There's another little notch slightly further down. We line it up with it and then push it into place, and it's going to lock into place. We can remove the hard drive cage by simply pulling the lever up, bringing the hard drive cage to the back, and then can take it out. So if we take a closer look at our hard drive cage, it's actually 2 hard drive cages combined. We've got this little lever here. If we push it up, and then we can actually separate the hard drive cages into 2 bits. So you can actually just install 1 drive cage in the case if you wanted. In each half of the hard drive cage there's a drive tray, and we can remove it by simply pulling it here. And in each of these drive trays we're going to be able to fit both a 2.5-inch drive and a 3.5-inch drive. So in terms of the 2.5-inch drive, all you do is set it onto the back, you're going to turn it over, and then you're going to screw it into place from underneath. Then you're going to be able to put your 3.5-inch drive into the place, and then you're going to be able to screw it also in from underneath. So that means in the Lancool 216 you're going to be able to fit a maximum of 6 2.5-inch drives and 2 3.5-inch drives. Next thing I want to do is show you how to move the front I/O to the side. So the first thing we need to do is free up all the cables. We've then got 2 screws at the front holding it on. And then with the screws removed we can simply remove the front I/O module, bringing all the cables through. We've got a panel to remove at the bottom of the case. It's held on with 2 screws. And then we can set our I/O module into place and then screw it into place. The cables we're going to route down towards the bottom of the case, and there is some cable tie down points at the bottom to help control the cables. And then we can move the front panel to the top and secure it with the 2 screws. And then this is what the I/O module is going to look like at the front. So this was sitting on the desk beside you. Having the buttons here and the ports here might be more convenient. One of the options that Lian Li give you for this case is this ARGB controller and USB module. So it gives you 2 additional USB Type A ports, and then these buttons to help you control the lighting of the built-in ARGB hub. So you can use the buttons to cycle through the various effects rather than using your motherboard. So I'm going to install this module down at the bottom, and I put the original controller back to the top of the case, but you can install them in either position and then secure it with the 2 screws. With our I/O cables routed down to the bottom, we can replace the case's front fan bracket. and get it secured into place with the thumb screws. And then I'm going to bring all the I/O cables in through the gap at the bottom, and we can secure the cables into place at the bottom with some of the included cable ties. So looking at the cables coming from the module, first of all we've got a SATA cable which is going to go into a SATA cable from our power supply to power the hub. We've got another USB 3.0 cable, so make sure your motherboard has 2 headers, or otherwise you're not going to be able to use the 2 additional USB Type A ports. And then we've got 2 cables for the ARGB. This one is actually going to go into the motherboard rather than the one that comes from the original ARGB hub. And this cable we're going to remove the protective covering from. And then the ARGB cable coming from our ARGB hub at the top of the case, instead of plugging it into the motherboard, we're simply going to join it into here. And then we get the front fans connected back up to the hub. So we've got our 2 PWM connectors. We'll insert them into here and here. And the ARGB connectors from the 2 front fans are daisy chained together. So we've only got one ARGB connector to plug into, and we've got a header just here. We are ready to start work on our motherboard, and we're going to install the CPU, the bracket for our CPU cooler, our M.2 SSD, and our RAM, all before we put the motherboard into the case. To install our CPU, we need to open the clip by pushing it down and up towards the middle of the motherboard, and then we can open the socket cover. We can then set our CPU into the socket, line it up with the notches at the top and at the bottom. Once we're happy our CPU is in the socket, we can close the cover over. Then all we need to do is close the lever again, and then this little black bit of plastic we're going to put into the motherboard box to keep safe. I'm going to install the M.2 SSD in the top slot, so I'm going to remove the heatsink. So we can set our drive into the slot at a slight angle, and then flatten the drive down and secure it into place with a screw from the motherboard box. In terms of heatsinks, we do have a few options. The drive does come with a heatsink that we can use. So our motherboard does come with this Gen 5 heatsink, which is actively cooled. We've got a fan here, and it will simply slot into place, and you can see just how beefy this heatsink is. And it would do a great job of keeping a Gen 5 drive cool. But because we've got a Gen 4 drive, I know it will actually stay cool enough with a standard heatsink. And in terms of aesthetics, I prefer the look of the original white heatsink. So I'm just going to remove the plastic protection from the back of it, and then we can put it back into place. To install the RAM, we're going to need to open the clips on the 2nd and 4th slot along from the CPU. Then we can line the RAM up with the slot. Once we're happy the RAM's lined up, it's just some firm pressure at the top to secure it into place. And then the same thing with our 2nd stick. We're going to need to remove these brackets. They're each held on with 2 screws. And then we've got one of these to screw on to each corner. Next, we can set the motherboard into the case, line that up with the standoffs at the back. Then we're going to secure the motherboard using the screws with a little lip around the outside. The next thing I want to do is get our case cables plugged in, starting off with our HD audio cable, which goes into this header down the bottom left hand side of the motherboard. 2 headers along, we've got a system fan header, so we're going to plug the PWM cable coming from our fan hub into here. Another 2 headers along, we've got an ARGB header, and we're going to plug the cable coming from our ARGB controller into here. Then we've got a USB 3.0 cable to go into here. And then at the bottom right hand side, we've got our front panel connectors. We've got another USB 3.0 header here, so we'll bring the cable through, line it up and push into place, and then bring the excess cable through to the back. And then just below that, we've got our Type C connector. We're now ready to install the power supply, and I've gone ahead and plugged in all the cables that we're going to need. So we've got a 24-pin cable, we've got 2 8-pin EPS cables, 3 8-pin PCIe cables. I've also plugged in a SATA cable because we're going to need SATA cables for our case's ARGB controllers and also our Lian Li Unifan controllers. And we've also got a USB cable that connects the power supply up to our motherboard. This is our power supply's intake fan, so we're going to want to install it facing down the way. So we can turn our power supply over and get it slided in at the back of the case. We can then secure the power supply into place using 4 of the larger screws from the case accessory box. We can then bring our 2 8-pin EPS cables through the cutout at the top and get them plugged into the motherboard. You'll notice I haven't used white cable extensions for these cables because once our radiator and fans are in place at the top, you're not really going to see the cables, and cable management is going to be easier at the back because of it. And then we can bring our 24-pin cable through the cutout, get it plugged into the motherboard, And then we're going to use the cable combs to help organize the cable. And then we can bring our USB cable coming from our power supply and get it plugged into one of the USB 2.0 headers at the bottom of the motherboard. And then we got the two SATA cables coming from our case's ARGB controllers, so we can plug one of them into the SATA cable here. And then we've got another slot on the SATA cable for the second one. We're now ready to start work on our AIO, but rather than use the fans that came with the AIO, I'm going to be using Lian Li's new second version of their SL120 Unifans. So these Unifans still connect together exactly the same way as the last version. They simply slot into place and then push together. One of the new things we can now do is remove the clips on the end that we're not going to need them. So we just twist them clockwise and these little clips come off. So this is going to improve compatibility. We've now only got one cable for controlling both the ARGB and the speed of the fans, and it goes into this end here. So that's our little connector. All we need to do is line it up and push into place. Another really cool thing we can do with these new Lian Li Unifans is we can actually daisy chain groups of Lian Li Unifans together. So we use this connector for doing so. It's slightly shorter than the other one. It simply slots into place at the end, and then we're going to push it to lock it into place. And then we're going to be able to plug this into the rear fan. So there's only going to be one cable going to the controller to control 4 fans, 3 on the radiator and our rear fan. So we can set our Lian Li Unifans onto the radiator, and then we're going to use the long radiator screws to secure them into place. We can then set our case's top panel into place, and then we'll secure it into place using the short radiator screws that came with our AIO. We can then bring our fan cable we want to go to the back of the case up through this cutout, and then it's going to go down through here into the back of the case. Coming from our pump, we've got 2 headers. One is the 3-pin fan connector, which we're going to plug into the pump header on our motherboard. The other is this DeepCool connector, which we're going to need to plug into an additional cable. So it simply lines up and pushes into place. Now coming from this one, we have a variety of different cables. One, we've got a 3-pin 5V ARGB cable, which is going to control the lighting on the pump. We're also going to need to power it using a SATA cable from our power supply. We've also got a 4-pin PWM connector, which we're not going to need to plug in. You only need to plug it in if you use the original fans that come with the AIO, and then you're going to be able to control them using your motherboard. If you do want to install the original fans, I've made a separate guide to installing this AIO with the original fans, and I'll put a link to that in the description. Next, we can set our AIO in at the top of the case. And then we can secure the top panel into place with the original 2 screws. And then I'm just going to pass this fan cable through to the rear compartment. Next, I'm going to add some thermal paste to the center of the CPU. And we can then set the pump into place. We can then secure it into place with 4 thumb screws that came with the AIO. We've got 3 fan headers at the top of the motherboard. Our CPU fan header is the one to the left, our pump header is the one in the middle, and over to the right hand side it's a system fan header. So I'm going to plug our pump into the pump header in the middle. And then I'm just going to bring the excess cable up to the top. The other cable coming from our AIO is for the ARGB, and I'm just going to pass this through to the back of the case. The ARGB cable coming from our pump, I'm going to plug into the ARGB header on our hub at the top of the case. So it's just a simple matter of lining it up and pushing into place. And we need to plug the SATA cable coming from the ARGB cable into the SATA cable from our power supply. The cable coming from the fans and the radiator, we're going to need to plug into our Lian Li Unifan hub. And this hub has 4 channels, 1, 2, 3 and 4. So I'm just going to plug it into channel number 2. And one of the nice things we can do is magnetically attach this hub to the controller panel at the back of the case. Coming from the hub, we've got 3 wires. We've got a USB cable, so I'm just going to pass it through the bottom of the case and get it plugged into the USB 2.0 header at the bottom of the motherboard. Coming from the bottom right hand side of the hub, we've got this double cable. One is a 3-pin 5V ARGB connector and the other is a 4-pin PWM connector. And if we plug these into our motherboard, it's going to allow our motherboard to control the hub. So because I have got our CPU fans plugged into here, I'm going to plug this cable into our CPU fan header, and the ARGB cable I'm going to plug into an ARGB header on the top of the motherboard. So I'm going to pass both the cables through the cutout at the back. And then coming from the bottom left of the hub, we've got two SATA cables, which we're going to plug into a SATA cable coming from our power supply. So just before we install our rear fan into the case, I'm going to plug the cable coming from the fans on the radiator into it. I'm then going to push the excess cable up to the back of the case and set the fan into place at the back. And then we'll get it screwed into place with 4 screws at the back. We can then set another group of Lian Li uni fans down at the bottom of the case set to intake. And then I'm going to use the long screws that come in the case accessory box to go through the fans and into the holes at the bottom of the case. And I'm going to pass the cable coming from the fan through to the back, where I'm going to plug it into channel number 1 on the uni fan hub. We're now ready to install our graphics card, and because the top PCI expansion slot on this motherboard is slightly lower than most motherboards, we're actually going to need to remove the 3rd and 4th bracket from the top, whereas normally it would be the 2nd and 3rd bracket. And we can open the clip on the top slot. We can then line our graphics card up with the slot. Once we're happy we've got everything lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the graphics card. It's going to clip into place, and then we can secure it into place with the 2 screws we've just removed. We can then bring our PCIe cables through the cutout at the bottom and get them plugged into the graphics card. We've then got some cable combs in the graphics card to help organise the cables. And then just to confirm where we've got our graphics card installed, there's absolutely no way we're going to be able to install the rear fan because it completely blocks the ports on our graphics card. Okay, last thing to do is some cable management. So that's the build complete, and I'm absolutely delighted with how it turned out. I've gone with my usual black and white colour theme, and it worked really well with all the parts that I have chosen. So you'll notice I've gone ahead and set the PC up, and the reason I've done that is recently in the Lancool 3 I did another build with an ASRock X670E motherboard, the same CPU, the same GPU, the same RAM. So the setup process for that, including updating the BIOS, installing Windows, all the drivers and setting up the RGB, is exactly the same. Because I have used Lian Li's L-Connect fans, and these are new fans, and also because we've got some buttons on the front of the case for controlling the lighting, I want now to show you how I actually set the PC up and got it looking just like this. So if we load up Lian Li's L-Connect, the first thing we're going to see is our system information. You'll notice if you look in the case that where the fans are set to rainbow, however, the rear fan, which we have daisy chained into the group of fans in the radiator, isn't lighting up. So to get it to show up, we're going to head over to the settings. We have plugged into port number 2, so we've got 3 fans on the radiator plus 1. So if I click on that and click apply, you'll now notice that the rear fan is lighting up. So I'm just going to change this to top, and into port 1 we've actually got the fans on the bottom, so I'm going to change that to bottom, and we've actually only got 2 fans, so I'm just going to click the 2 fans, and then I'm just going to deselect all the fans for ports 3 and ports 4 and click on apply. So if we head over to the fan lighting, so to adjust the fans, all I need to do is click on the group that I want. They're labeled now with bottom and top, so we'll set the bottom fans. It's currently set to rainbow. If I want to go for a static color, I'm going to click on static color, and then all I need to do is grab the white and paint in all the fans in the group to white. If I want to change just one of the groups, I can click on apply, but I actually want to change them all, so I'm going to click apply to all. And you'll notice that all the fans in the case have now turned to white. we've got a lot more options. We head over to our fan and pump profile. So we take a look at our top fans, which are currently the fans on the radiator. They're currently running in the quiet profile. I would like them to run in the standard profile, so I'm going to click on standard. If I want to adjust the fan curves, I can do that manually. And they're currently taking the temperature off the CPU, which is just the way I want them to work. So clicking on our bottom fans, they're currently running in the quiet profile. Again, I'm going to click on the standard profile. They're currently taking their temperature off the CPU, but it makes sense to take that off the GPU, which is a really nice feature that we now have. And again, if the GPU is under low load, I'm happy that these fans do stop. So I'm going to click on the start stop and click OK. And then we'll click on apply. And if we do want to control the fans with the motherboard software, we do have the option to do it here. So I want to show you how to control the lighting using the buttons on the front of the case, and we can adjust the lighting on the rim of the fans and the fan blades themselves. So starting off with the ring of light around the outside, we can adjust the colour by pressing the bottom button. And the button just above it then is to control the mode. Same thing with the buttons above to adjust the colour, so it's the bottom one for the colour. And then if we want to adjust the mode, it's the top one. So you can see we can adjust the fan blades and the outer ring of light themselves. To get the lighting to sync up with the motherboard, we need to press the colour button at either the top or the bottom for 3 seconds. So hold it for 3 seconds. The light's going to flash, and I have the motherboard lighting set to white, so it's going to match the rest of things. Again, to get it off, it's either the top or bottom colour button, and that's us back to the controller. If you want to combine the effects on the rim of the fan and also the fan blades, all you need to do is press the 2 colour buttons for 3 seconds. Again, the lights will flash. And then it's just the ports on the top that are going to be active. So again, to cycle through the modes, it's the top button. And you'll notice that the whole of the fans are now working together. And then if we want to adjust the colour, it's the bottom button. So I really enjoyed putting this build together, and what I'm planning on doing now is a full case review. So you'll find a link to that video in the description. If you have enjoyed this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.